Oh, you have faces on the screen, Dan.
I
You're a host.
know, it's so exciting. If anyone is like kind of just logging in or jumping in, I'm making a call. We're here talking about parts. So there's a part of me that craves community, that craves connection. It might be, and we'll talk a little bit about this, an attached part that we all have. And one of my attached parts is very much desiring to see any and all faces that are willing to be on camera. So if you are willing to get out of the blank box in the ether somewhere and join in our learning community on camera, I would just love to see you, love to see your faces. Not a requirement, just a personal preference and request.
With that, I'm going to introduce our fabulous speaker. So, hello, everyone. Good evening. I am Dr. Cassie DeSena Jacobs. I am the Director of Mental Health Initiatives here at the School of Social Work at VCU. And it is truly my privilege to have our speaker here tonight. Um, Dan is a LCSW, Dan is a doctoral candidate, and in my opinion, most importantly, Dan centers um, trauma-informed work in every conversation that Dan has. I think we are really, really lucky to have Dan as our speaker today, and we will be able to learn from Dan's presentation. And Dan is amazing. I also consider Dan just a dear, dear friend. So I'm so grateful to have you here. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Oh my gosh, well, it really is such a privilege, such an honor to be asked to present on an area of practice that is growing in a lot of popularity, which is a wonderful thing. Um, and an approach to therapy that really isn't talked about in a lot of graduate programs. And it can be a very, very deeply powerful, deeply transformative approach to treatment. And we're going to talk a lot about that later. So it is really a privilege and an honor to talk about this approach to clinical work that's very near and dear to my heart, near and dear to my practice. Again, I'll just put a final little call out there for anyone that is willing to be on camera. I invite you to join our learning community on camera. Undo my aloneness. Let's join in connection together as we're learning about parts work. And I do want to name that we're learning together. So please don't tout me as the end all be all expert here. I'm a learner alongside all of you, and I hope to learn from each of you or some of you as we move through our presentation today. Could we maybe just start if anyone is willing to unmute and just say a hello, if you're able to unmute if you have that ability? Just unmute. I'd just love to hear a few voices say hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey there.
Hello.
Ah,
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
beautiful. Thank you. It's like music to my ears. I've got a few students I think that I'm teaching that are joining tonight, and I don't know if they're sick of hearing that yet because I have them do that in every class, every live class that I teach. Just undo my aloneness. Let me hear your chorus of voices. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so today I'm going to introduce myself, give you a little bit of an introduction to parts work. We're going to move into, for anyone who's willing to participate, an experiential exercise. It is a solo exercise, so you don't have to worry about like unmuting yourself and being a part of or anything like that, but proceed with that at your level of comfort. We'll go into a little bit of a history of parts work, and then we're going to talk about the key part for me of this presentation is not actually so much about the exercises that we might lead our clients through. The key part of this presentation for me is the neurobiological underpinnings of parts work. If there's anything at all that you leave this next little bit of time with, it's more of that neurobiological, theoretical understanding of how and why parts work is effective. Because whether you know it or not, you're already working with parts. You just might not call it parts if you are in clinical practice or if you're in an internship or something like that. You're already working with parts. I'm really just introducing a linguistic framework that can help with case conceptualization and the administration of very impactful interventions with some of our client systems. But again, if there's anything I want you to walk away with, it is a strong, firm neurobiological understanding of how and why parts work is such an effective way of practicing. Then we're going to talk a little bit about working with parts. I'll briefly review some advanced training opportunities for each of you to look into. And then if we've got time, we'll open up for some questions. But speaking of questions, I do invite questions along the way. I do invite a little bit of dialogue. I can talk a lot. I've heard it said I've got the gift of the gab. But that said, I don't want to be talking at you just solid for the next, 83 minutes. So please do. If you've got questions, raise your virtual hand or just unmute yourself and jump in. Okay. So let's get into it. Just a little bit about me. As Cassie said, my name is Dan Cimo. I am an LCSW in Virginia. I'm a proud RAM. I'm a two-time RAM graduate of VCU, first in 2012 with my BFA in theater performance, go VCU School of the Arts. And I graduated with my MSW in May of 2022. I am now pursuing my doctorate of social work and trauma-informed leadership and practice from Barry University. I anticipate graduating in December 2029. Um, and I'm a part of the VCU School of Social Work as a community embedded faculty. One of my absolute favorite courses to teach, Cassie and I were just talking about it, was trauma and clinical social work practice. Um, and I am the founder and owner of Coherent Mind Trauma Counseling. I just recently moved into solo practice, completely virtual telehealth with a specific focus on trauma-informed care. I take a huge attachment framework in everything that I do. So if you're not so familiar with the science of attachment, I highly encourage you to look into it. We are going to talk a little bit about it today. I also have a focus on grief and loss, men's mental health, and LGBTQ plus affirming care, populations that I love working with very dearly. I am EMDR trained. EMDR is my preferred practice model in everything that I do. It's a highly integrative and experiential way of working and is a perfect fit for parts work. And actually parts work itself, um, uh, generally speaking, is quite integrative as well. So I hope that you see ways following our presentation today that you can start to implement or look for more training to integrate parts work into your practice and whatever your preferred modality is. I am pursuing advanced EMDR certification with a focus on complex developmental trauma. And I'm not going to read the list to you there, but since I graduated in May, what I can tell you is that I've become a little bit of a junkie. I'm going to use that word for advanced training. I am just thirsty for training and highly encourage you to pursue your areas of focus and interest after you graduate or in your early professional careers. So go get that training. I do want to acknowledge a little bit of my social location as we're moving through our presentation today. I do have some of these identifiers that are at the intersection of my social location, white cisgender male, and I'm also in an implicit position of power as I'm giving this presentation. And I also want to note that all of you are bringing your parts and you're bringing the intersections of your social locations. And so there may be parts of you that don't respond well to some of the things that I bring. And I just want to honor and acknowledge that. Please know that it is not ever my intention to cause rupture or to create offense for any of you. But that said, if it does happen, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. I'm happy to set up a meeting with you and see if we can reach repair together. And if you're not comfortable reaching out to me directly, I encourage you to reach Cassie by her email. Okay. So really, the overarching objective of this presentation, of this seminar, is to just orient you towards parts work as a way of working. That's really it. We're going to get, like I said, into the neurobiological underpinnings of parts work, the how and why it works, with a specific focus on this amazing mechanism of change in the brain called memory reconsolidation. Learning about memory reconsolidation radically shifted and transformed my entire practice. It's like having X-ray vision into any process of change. So we are going to be talking a good bit about that. And it's my hope that you walk away from this workshop with a little bit more of an ear that's able to start hearing and listening for different parts, whether those parts are your own or parts that you're seeing in your client systems. I do want to note that this is not a comprehensive training in parts work. It is not a comprehensive training in internal family systems. Thank you, Tara or Tara. I do intend to share my slides. Yes, so you should have access to these after the seminar today. But I do want to note, yes, this is not a comprehensive training. I really want us to be pay special attention to our areas of competence. And anyone that's my student knows I will harp on and on about competence. So please do be mindful of the limitations of your areas of practice, your current knowledge base, and don't go around meddling with some of this stuff unless you have received advanced consultation, supervision, or training in it, because we are working with our client systems, nervous systems, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but parts work is very powerful and we can start to create some real change, sometimes change that our clients are not ready for. So just really be mindful of your areas and scopes of competence in your own practice. Okay. And always in everything that we do, we really want to be client centered. So always keep your clients' windows of tolerance front and center as you're engaging with them, and particularly as you're starting to incorporate parts work into your work, if you choose to do so. Or you know what? Some of you might say, I'm actually not interested in parts work at all after hearing what Dan had to say, and that's gravy too. That's totally okay. But we're just taking a broad survey overview of parts work in practice. Okay. Here we go. Let's continue. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit about what brought me to parts work to begin with. I was first introduced to the idea of parts all the way back in my junior year of high school psychology course when our teacher was talking about psychopathology and dissociative identity disorder. And she introduced us to a book called When Rabbit Howls. And she warned us, don't go chasing after this book. It's probably deep. It's probably too intense for you. Well, of course, it just piqued my ear. And of course, I started looking at it and I started getting introduced to concepts like trauma, dissociation, dissociated parts, these sort of fragmented parts of the psyche that can kind of claim their own personas and perspectives on the world. And then in my work as an actor, as an artist, I started getting familiar with some of my own parts artistically and creatively. You know, one of my favorite quotes about acting is that acting is behaving truthfully under imaginary circumstances. So the more personally connected I can be to the work that I'm creating, the more authentic of an experience it will be for my audiences. Anyways, all that to say that in that, my theater work really got me personally in contact with some of my different parts and really engaging truthfully and authentically from inside those parts for the sake of entertainment and performance. And then, well before I made the concrete decision to become a clinician, I started learning about these different therapeutic modalities, including internal family systems, just doing my own personal research, got really interested in it, started listening to all the podcasts, all the videos, and then basically forgot about it. Just kind of completely forgot about parts work for several years. It wasn't until after I graduated from VCU in one of my first training experiences in a model called brain spotting, they were talking a lot about parts and dissociation. And I had no idea what they were talking about. Because again, I kind of just forgot any and all of that information that I'd gleaned before. I was like, parts, dissociation, I'm just here to treat trauma. Well, it turns out that if we are trauma-informed practitioners, very likely we're going to be introduced to dissociation and dissociated parts. So that just kind of, again, piqued my ear. I ended up taking an advanced brain spotting training in brain spotting and parts work and all of the other models that I named in one of my previous slides, parts and memory therapy, internal family system, core self-reclamation therapy, all these different types, and trauma-informed stabilization treatment, all these different parts works approaches that just really reintroduced me to the power of parts work. And then in my own training and therapeutic experiences as a client, getting into closer contact with my own parts. And honestly, you may have heard this before, but I hope to just be a repeater here because learning does take repetition. The best teacher is experience. And so I highly, highly encourage each and every one of you, if you are interested in learning more about parts work or integrating it into your practice, that you get personal experience with parts work on the client side. It can be incredibly, incredibly powerful, and that's just going to make you a more effective clinician and practitioner who is facilitating parts work for your client systems. So just a shout out there for personal experience with this stuff. And nowadays in my clinical practice, like I said, parts work is a regular part of my practice. I integrate it as clinically appropriate, in consent, with consent of my client systems. And the way that I practice parts work primarily has to do with really bolstering and scaffolding support around my clients' present day adult selves so that they can stand in as a secure attachment figure for their younger parts carrying their pain. And that I've seen as being some of the most powerful and deeply transformative type of parts work. And I want you to know up front that there are lots of ways to practice parts work. We're going to get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about IFS, but another big, big takeaway, and this is going to be repeated throughout, there are so many ways to practice and integrate parts work. There's not just one way. This is one of the ways that I found most effective for me. So if it sounds like I'm speaking a different language to you, hopefully it will become a little bit more familiar as we go along. Okay. So what I'd like to invite you to do here is come along with me in just a brief experiential journey with parts work. And what I'd like for you to do, if you're willing to fully engage, I invite you to, or if it seems a little bit uncomfortable to do something like this, you can maybe just take a mindful approach and just listen as we're navigating through. But what I invite you to do is, if you're comfortable, just find a position in which you feel grounded, calm, and settled in your seat. And if you are sitting, I invite you to plant both of your feet on the ground and just feeling yourself into the here and now. Letting the past few minutes, hours, days, and weeks be just that, the past, while you settle and focus into the right here, right now, which is the only moment that we actually have. And I invite you to start tuning inward, just getting in touch with your inner world in this particular moment of time, keeping an awareness of where you are, who you are, how you are now. Noticing your feet on the ground, noticing a light engagement with your core. Maybe you want to roll your shoulders back, invite some length and space into the spine, allowing your breath to fall in through the nose into the deepest parts of your belly. And nice, slow, long release. Exhale through the mouth like you're blowing on hot soup. And just take a few mindful breaths here. While you find yourself settling into a space inside in which you feel calm, maybe a space inside in which you can connect with the energy of compassion, connection, creativity, courage. Find that most grounded, centered you that you possibly can. And know that as you're contacting that energy, you're starting to make contact with what we might call your core self. And I invite you, just very briefly, to notice if there are any other sensations in the body that don't feel so comfortable. Without judgment, from this place of courage, compassion, curiosity, calm, just noticing. And if there is any sense, any thought line, any physical sensation, any emotional impulse outside of that space of calm, curious compassion, maybe you can invite that sensation, thought line, emotional impulse, or even memory fragment to just ask it, take a step back from it, and ask it what it might need or want in this moment from you, standing in the shoes of your wise adult core self. And see if you might take a moment to, in your imagination, in your mind, give that part what it's asking for. And just notice if that shifts or changes anything in how you feel in your body. Take a brief moment just to thank that part for showing up with whatever its intentions are, whatever its needs are, and know that you're here for that part. All again, you just take a moment now to ground and center into that core self space. When you feel ready, gently fluttering your eyes open, letting some of the light back in, reorienting to the screen, the blue light. And I might like to just hear, it's pretty kind of a brief little exercise, but I might like to hear just a voice or two of reflection on anything that you noticed as we were going through that little piece of engagement. If anyone is willing to share a reflection. Any courageous or willing voices.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Dan. I really love mindfulness exercises like that, but I find it kind of hard to do them solo, so I appreciate the guide. Um, I feel like in this one for me, I was able to feel a real sense of calm. Um, I feel like my baseline, I have a lot of kind of just like energy that's always kind of resting under my skin, but with the breathing and the pausing, I feel like I was able to kind of break past that and realize that I did have some calmness inside me already.
Wonderful. I love that reflection, Olivia. Thank you so much. From an EMDR perspective, there's always a resource. There is always a resource. And some of our job as social workers working from a strengths-based perspective is to hold the truth of our clients' resources that they might not yet be able to see for themselves. And we're going to be a lot better off helping them if we're able to really connect to our own internal resources. So I've just heard it said, and I live by it, there's always a resource. We might just have to work a little bit hard and do some super sleuthing to find it. But all of my clients know at this point that I've got a Scooby-Doo ear. And whenever I start hearing some parts or hearing some difficulties connecting to resources or something like that, I say, oh, wait, hold on. My parts alert is going up. I feel my Scooby-Doo ear going up. Let's be curious about this and see if we can find something here. Right? So let's always have that Scooby-Doo ear up for both parts that are distressed and parts that have resources. So long as we're approaching it from our own mindful place of self-awareness of our own internal resources. So really, really appreciate that reflection, Olivia. Thank you. Anyone else? Maybe one more voice, just a brief little reflection.
I'll share a little. Um, I did parts work in therapy, not knowing it was called that when I was younger as a client. And what I noticed today is like my adult self is here. And as I was noticing that, I heard like a young, I don't know, she's like 5, where she's like, I've been running the show the whole time. I'm exhausted. And I was like, that's okay. You can go to bed. I'm going to picture you taking a nap because I would like to hear this talk right now. And so it's just interesting to see what came up like that.
Powerful,
Yeah.
powerful reflection. Is it Ayla?
It's Ayla.
Ayla, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You know, we might get into this a little bit, but one of my favorite, just really brief interventions to do with my clients is remind them, I'm sorry, does a 5-year-old have a license to drive a car?
Exactly.
If a 5-year-old is driving the car, we're liable to run off the road. Remember, you are the adult. You have the training, you have the experience, and your adult self, you have the license to drive the car. So maybe we can let our little parts in the passenger seat tuck them in okay, knowing that they're in safe hands, right?
Totally. Totally.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for all who participated. Okay, so let's really get into it here. What the heck is parts work? What does that even mean? Parts work assumes overarchingly that the mind is naturally multiplicitous, comprised of all these different aspects of personality, and that each aspect of personality is going to have a very unique, single I, I language point of view about the world, about self, others, and the world. And each part is going to have its own habituated behaviors, feelings, survival impulses, and action tendencies. And this I'm drawing right from Dick Schwartz in the IFS Institute that there are no bad parts, none at all. Even when the parts presenting strategies, protections, and behaviors are problematic, we need to hold the truth very firmly that every part has positive intentions. I sometimes do a good bit of work with couples, and I like to remind my couples too, right? Because this is one thing that they do not like to believe is that even in the worst moments, the highest intensity conflict, believe it or not, chances are your partner's explosive anger or avoidant withdrawal is actually coming from a deep place of positive intention with a desire to connect. And this is the only way in this moment that they know how to get that need met, right? So every single part has a positive intention, most likely to either protect or connect. Okay. The primary goal of parts work is to achieve inner harmony among conflicting parts, right? Really simple kind of analogy here is you might have even caught yourself in this, right? We sort of use parts work language all the time. It's like, well, there's a part of me that this, but there's a part of me that that. There's a part of me that wants the chocolate ice cream here. There's a part of me that wants the vanilla ice cream, right? And we might take a look at that as like a very minor kind of fun example of two competing parts. They want different things. And so some of our job is to be able to step back from those competing parts so that neither of them is driving the car and that we're able to assume more voice, choice, and autonomy and help facilitate dialogue among and between the parts so that we, standing in our present day adult core selves, can be the one to make the decision, right? That we're able to operate from this place of greater calmness, curiosity, compassion, clarity, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. What Dick Schwartz in the IFS Institute calls the 8 C's of the self, the capital S self. So the goal is to help the client system lean more into that seat of the core self and operate from that place rather than from distressed or conflicting parts. And the primary way that we do this is to unblend or take a step back from parts, dialogue with and between them, get to know them deeply, provide them with their needs, release any toxic stress, shame, burdening beliefs through experiential engagement with these parts. And then again, from the core self, lead with more voice, choice, and autonomy. Parts work can be massively effective in working with most kind of like outpatient presentations that we might see: anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, eating disorders, attachment related wounding. There are so many applications to parts work. So we're going to go through just a brief history of parts work here. I am not a history buff. So for those of you who don't have parts that love history buffs, let's see if we can just get a little bit interested. Let's pretend, right? Because interestingly, parts work has a vast history that spans centuries, if not millennia, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Parts have been with us for as long as we've been around. And some of the places that we've seen parts work originally is going all the way back to indigenous shamanic traditions. And those traditions essentially believed that traumatic experiences fragmented the soul. And that the way to achieve integration is through a process called soul retrieval. I actually want to take like a little bridge of a side note here that, we as social workers, we operate from this place of the biopsychosocial spiritual, right? And it is my hope that as we move through this presentation, you're able to see how parts work really functions from within all of those different aspects of the biopsychosocial spiritual. And here, the beginnings of parts work traditions really, really focused on the spiritual. Ancient Egyptians viewed the soul as composed of nine interdependent parts, integration being the central task after death. We see parts work extending back to ancient Indian philosophy with this idea of Atman as the core self, the eternal, unchanging, witnessing core of consciousness that's surrounded by all these different layers of mind, personality, emotion, sensation. Buddhist psychology describes the self as this aggregate of parts, and that really it's the composite of parts that creates what we call the self, which is really an illusion from this particular vantage point or perspective. We see parts work in ancient Greek philosophy. Plato, Aristotle, some of the greats like that, right? Propose that psychological health is achieved through the resolution of conflict between these types of parts: logical, emotional, and desirous. So we see parts work, the origins going all the way, all the way, all the way back. If we're talking about more of the evolution, the clinical evolution of parts work, Jean-Marc Charcot in the 1880s was one of the first pioneers, clinical pioneers, to say that symptoms were psychological in nature, and that he had essentially a training institute where some of the best of the best, or the greats, the pioneers of the pioneers trained and studied and developed their own methodologies and ways of engaging in the alleviation of suffering, right? Pierre Janet was in some of my research, I found he was like the father of dissociation. He was the person to ever first use the word dissociation and introduce that to the world. And he echoed what we saw in past traditions, that trauma causes fragmentation. It causes fragmented, autonomous parts of consciousness. And that he was the father of developing this three-phase model of treatment: stabilization, processing, and integration, which we're going to be able to see in most major forms of therapy today, right? I think this is my opinion that any therapeutic modality worth its salt is going to really follow this trajectory of stabilization, building safety, trust, processing through experiential engagement, disconfirming experiences, changing emotions, cognitions, behavioral impulses, all that stuff. It's like the intervention phase, right? And then integration, closing out, consolidating new learnings, beliefs, and ways of being in the world. William James, who had a lot to do with transpersonal psychology, the realm of the transpersonal or beyond the person, sort of moving into this more spiritual framework. He was very much a believer that you see it here, the mind is a confederation of psychic entities, and that this unified singular self is not the default. We're all, I think, probably familiar with Freud, who gave us this idea of the id, ego, and superego, which in itself we can think of as a parts work model. But what Freud did was that he moved away from dissociation and placed more of an emphasis on this idea of repression, right? That we kind of repress these impulses, we repress these instincts, and had a lot less to do with dissociation. So dissociation kind of fell on the back burner for a while. Um, Carl Jung, who is one of Freud's proteges, he was a lot more kind of spiritually inclined than Freud was, who liked to chalk a lot of things up to, autobiographical narrative and sex, right? Jung was like, everything isn't just autobiographical and sex and nature here, Freud. And Jung was like, I think there's a lot more going on with our client systems. Jung gave us ideas like the archetypes, the collective unconscious. Jung had a lot to do, major influences on psychological concepts that we might see in pop psychology, right? But massively influential, and that he used a method called active imagination to engage in this inner dialogic process. I'm going to kind of like run through a little bit more quickly here. But what we start to see are just these concepts over time, right? Through this process of psychosynthesis. Robert Assagioli believed in the I, the higher transpersonal self. Jacob Marino, he was really instrumental in bringing more experiential work to the clinical process. And then we get the idea of ego states emerging. Paul Federn set the stage for ego state therapy and transactional analysis, all these different ways of working with parts. Eric Byrne created transactional analysis from a more attachment and relational oriented framework that he essentially said we kind of carry within us, these like internalized parent parts and different child parts, the present day adult part. Fritz and Laura Pearls developed Gestalt therapy, the empty chair technique, helping their clients engage in this experiential dialogue with either different parts of self or imaginary others that have become internalized parts. Then we see more of the development of ego state therapy in the Watkins line of work. Hal and Sidra Stone created their own method of working with parts called voice dialogue. Then we've got Dick Schwartz with the development of internal family systems through his work with as a family therapist and a systems thinker, and his work with eating disorders. He really fleshed out internal family systems, which is just exploding in popularity. And then we've got this return to a focus on dissociation through the structural dissociation model, which places a really big emphasis on our 5 primary survival strategies that we're going to get into here in just a little bit. Then we've got the creation of trauma-informed stabilization treatment. Janina Fisher essentially integrated internal family system sensory motor psychotherapy. She does a bit of EMDR. She integrates attachment science, and that she really draws on parts work as an explicit way of working with trauma in the here and now. And then we've got all these other modern day pioneers: Sue Ann Poliro, Nancy Napier, Shirley Jean Schmidt, Robin Shapiro, April Steele, Jane Norick. All of these people who have taken parts work as the overarching framework for transformational change and made it their own and adapted it into their own models. So Dan, why the heck are you going on and on and on about the history of parts work here? The reason why is because I want you to know IFS is just one way of working with parts. Dick Schwartz did not create, I say this with peace and love and a lot of respect for Dick Schwartz. Dick Schwartz did not create parts work, folks, okay? Parts work extends back centuries, if not millennia. So the IFS Institute does not own parts work, and getting trained in IFS is not the only way to effectively work with parts. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of ways to work with parts. And if you go on to get your own training, you might be the 1,000th and 1st. way of working with parts, right? So get trained in as many different ways of working with parts as you can and make it your own. And maybe you'll be the next pioneer, right? Okay. Any sort of overarching thoughts, questions, reflections so far? I do like to hear voices, not just my own.
Hey, so this is Stephanie Harrison. I put a thing in the chat. I'm wondering, because I applied to the IFS and there's this lottery and everybody's like, ooh, do this. And then there's this backlash also. Some people who are like, I got in and like it's very privileged and this is the only way. And then some people say it's kind of like cultish. So I was glad to hear you say that. And so like, well, I got in. I'm also a little bit hesitant to go forward with it just because of what you said. There are so many ways of working with parts. And so what's your thought on that?
hmm Well, I think it's a wonderful thing to gain fervor and enthusiasm for any way of working because the more conviction we have in our ways of working, that's going to translate to our client systems. So I certainly don't begrudge that in any way, shape, or form. Um, I'll share with you what one of my teachers shared with me. She said, date your ways of working. Date them, don't marry them. And the
Mm,
reason why is because we're constantly discovering more about the nervous system, more about the brain, more about advanced ways to experientially engage in our client systems, right? If you've noticed, even polyvagal theory has kind of been under the microscope lately because we're learning more and more about the nervous system and nervous system functioning. Even before that, the idea of the triune brain, right? We were really functioning from this
true.
place of the triune brain. And now that's all but been sort of purported as not completely neurobiologically accurate, right? So date your learnings, date your trainings,
Mm,
date your models, don't marry them. Be open and flexible to different ways of working, and however you get trained, make it your own, right?
thank you.
Does that
Uh,
kind of answer your query,
No,
Stephanie?
yeah, it does. And like everything, like even DR is very expensive. I'm actually certified in accelerated resolution therapy.
Mhm.
And I love it. Like when we start out, we want to go down every rabbit hole and I want to learn everything and I want to be good at everything and I want to give my clients everything. And you can't do that, right? Both in time and money. And you just have to kind of like let's just bring it in and we can do a lot like I feel like I do a lot of parts work without calling them all these things, and so I look forward to hearing the rest of that. And you're right, he did not discover parts. We've been doing parts work for a long time.
Let your clients reveal their parts to you.
Yeah,
Your clients are always going to be your best teachers, and experience is going to teach you more than, a textbook might, right?
thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Anyone else
And
needs?
just a quick hi there, I'm Jasmine. And I remember, oof, way more than 20 years ago now, neurolinguistic programming. I don't know if you mentioned that in your list of previous parts therapies, but NLP also, kind of borrowing with Ericksonian hypnosis,
Mhm.
really leaned into this idea of parts work. So agree that it has been there for a long time. I think also I love the experience, and I do agree wholeheartedly. This is a very intuitive thing for us as human beings, and it I love what you said. It's going to come up in the course of work, and to be able to talk about it, bring it in, use these different parts to support what the client is wanting to do. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jasmine. Thank you for your contributions. No, so appreciate it. Well, so let's get into the brain. I love the brain, the brain, the brain, the brain. And I'm going to actually self-disclose here. When I got started in my MSW journey, I had no idea and no interest in anything to do with biology. I'm like, I'm here for the psychology and the emotional, and that's it. And I was totally blind to the fact we only know what we know when we know it. But what I was not considering is that we are always working with biology. Why? We are first and foremost working with the most important organ of our biology, the brain. Don't ever, ever forget that you are working with biology. First and foremost, bio, psychosocial, spiritual. There's a reason, folks, I truly believe why bio comes first in the bio, psychosocial, spiritual. We're always working with biology, we're working with the brain. And you know what? The brain is comprised of parts. The brain is not a solid organ. We can even think of the brain as having two primary parts, left brain, right brain. And of those primary parts, those parts have parts, and those parts have parts, right? We're working with the brain, and the brain itself is a systemic structure of parts. The brain's primary job is survival. That is what the brain's first and foremost job is to keep us safe and survive. And it does this by looking for patterns, right? I like to explain to my clients that the brain is a pattern-seeking, meaning-making survival organ. And it is designed to learn. And how does the brain learn? Through experience. Experience is the best teacher. And we're learning from a memory system of implicit memory, meaning often unconscious, non-verbal, non-linguistic memory that includes things like knowing what food is, knowing the laws of gravity, knowing how to string words together so that we can communicate different ideas, right? Implicit memory essentially drives any way that we know to be in the world that we don't have to consciously think about. Because could you imagine having to discover gravity in every single waking moment? Or anytime you get in the car, having to discover the micro muscle movements necessary to turn the wheel? That would be exhausting. The brain is the most calorically expensive organ in the body, or one of the most calorically expensive organs in the body. And so it's going to seek to save energy however it can. And one of the ways that it does that is through implicit memory, right? The brain, I like to joke with my clients and I tell my students too, the brain is always wearing history colored glasses. Always. There is no such thing as separating the brain's perception of the here and now from what it learned in the past. So the brain is always wearing history colored glasses, and so are the parts of the brain, right? Hebb's law, if any of us are familiar with Hebb's law, states that neurons that fire together wire together, and they create these systems of neural networks that carry survival-oriented information. And these patterns and like neuronal connections typically start forming in our earliest attachment relationships, our families of origin, right? And again, a lot of this learning of what gets internalized by the brain is implicit, meaning it often does not have words until it does, because it's information, simplistically speaking, this is really a generalization, lives in the right brain downstairs limbic system, where our memories and emotional triggering centers live, right? Talk a little bit more about this. Just a really quick video here on how neurons communicate.
Neurons communicate with each other, relaying messages throughout your body and powering all of your thoughts and actions. Neurons talk to each other using both electrical and chemical signals. Messages start as electrical signals traveling rapidly down a neuron. These signals are called action potentials. When they reach the gap between two neurons, the messages need some help to get across. The information is transformed from an action potential into a chemical message, which crosses the gap called a synapse. The release of those chemical messengers can trigger an action potential in the neuron on the other side of the synapse, conveying the message onward. Or it can quiet the message. This happens over and over and over. And with repeated activity, the synapse gets stronger, so the next message is more likely to get through. That way, neurons learn to pass on important messages and ignore the rest. This is how our brains learn and adapt to an ever-changing world.
This is happening every single moment of every single day, that the neurons are firing and wiring together, strengthening and reinforcing previous learnings or taking in new learnings, right? That the super highways of the brain actually have the potential to expand or change direction. This is what learning looks like. This might be a little bit creepy. There might be parts of us that are like, ooh, it looks like spiders. I don't want to look. So just be prepared for that. But this is what neuronal connection actually looks like when we're learning. And in fact, is happening in your very brain right now. Let's take a look.
What you're looking at here are two neurons under the microscope that I've filmed. And if you wait really patiently, you'll be able to see them connecting to one another.
This is happening in your brains right now. If you notice, the neurons are like people. They strive for connection. I want you to know that connection and community as a species is our primary evolutionary survival skill. It, more than anything else, is the way that we've grown and evolved in the ways that we have, is through connection. And so just like people, the neurons in our brains are striving for and seeking connection always. Okay, thank you. So what really is a part from a neurobiological perspective? A part is a neural network. That's it. A part is a neural network that fires and wires together, that contains specific learnings about the self, about others, about the world, and how to stay safe and survive in it. Okay? I want to be very, very clear. I'm going to repeat myself. Learning takes repetition, and your neurons are meeting and greeting each other in this very moment. A part is very simply a neural firing and wiring, a cluster of neuronal connections that learned through experience how to stay safe and survive. That is the primary overarching neurobiological underpinning I would want any of you to walk away with. Parts carry these learnings that teach us, depending on the context, what to do to stay safe and survive. You may have noticed, even in your own experience as a human being, when I'm around this group of people, I act this way. I take on this language set. I start moving differently. The pitch of my voice changes. I have a sense of humor over here. But then when I'm around this group of people, maybe family of origin, it's totally different. I get these knots in my belly. I feel closed, depending on the family system. These are. But the point being that we have these different experiences based on context, and we notice in ourselves the different ways that we interact in different social contexts. Remember, person and environment, right? Person and environment. We are shaped by the environment, the social environment, and the social environment is shaped by us. It's a reciprocal communication. And that the social environment tends to bring out these different personality structures, the activation of different neural wirings and firings based on how that cluster of neurons learn to stay safe and survive and get needs met in this particular type of social environment. Even right here, right now, you might find yourself clicked into a way of thinking, feeling, or being because you're in an academic professional learning environment. But go out for cocktails with your friends, and a very different part of you is probably going to emerge, right? It's kind of an extreme case, but I'm painting an extreme picture here so you get the concept that a part is really simply a cluster of neurons that communicate, that learned in a particular way how to stay safe and survive and get needs met. And each part tends to carry an action tendency when thrust into a moment of survival. This really comes from the structural dissociation model, that every part is going to carry, again, in a particular action tendency. A lot of us are probably familiar with fight, flee, freeze, right? As our overarching survival strategies. When we're moved into that autonomic takeover, the blood starts pulsing, we go into hyper activation, right? Hyper arousal, or maybe we move into hypo arousal, we slow down. We might kind of get sad or feel depressed, a little bit disconnected from ourselves and other people. Or if we're taking the possum stance or the squirrel stance, we might just completely freeze in place and hope that the threat just passes by and doesn't see us. But then there are two other key survival strategies: appease or submit. We might notice this as like people pleasing. I kind of forego and forfeit my preferences and desires to prioritize yours. Or attach, cry for help, right? For those who are more kind of oriented toward anxious attachment strategies, this might come out as like kind of like immediately crying, like actually crying, or maybe begging, pleading. A lot of people with very strong attached parts might be like kind of labeled and stigmatized as like clingy or needy or something like that. It's just a survival skill, remembering that community and connection as a species is our primary evolutionary survival strategy. So every part carries an action tendency, a way that it learned to stay safe and survive in the world. Now, there are just a few different perspectives on this, on the actual nature of parts. I am sharing with you more from the structural dissociation model of parts, where IFS might take a little bit more of a different perspective, or a model like IFS that essentially claims that parts are inherent to the psyche, that we're born into the world with them. There are countless numbers of them, and that they each maintain their own perspectives, and that experience kind of unlocks their potentials, right? And that when trauma happens, parts become burdened, often young parts. They become burdened with negative core beliefs about self, others, and the world. And so then the nature of the work is to unburden those parts that in an IFS model are called exiles. I'll get a little bit more into that here in a minute. And then there's this idea of dissociated parts, that essentially we sort of are born into the world with a tendency toward being a single unitary self, but that as the world we meet fails to meet our needs, first and foremost, our attachment needs, our needs for connection, nurturance, being seen, known, deeply heard and understood, that trauma fragments the psyche. It fragments us into different parts. So I just want you to know that there are different conceptualizations around the kind of nature of parts. So if we're talking here a little bit more about trauma and implicit memory, right? Like we were talking about, we're always working with the brain. We're always working with the brain. And that the two key structures of the brain that I would want you to know about more than anything are the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala we can think of as our fear center, or really our threat detection center. Now, I've heard it said that the amygdala is really good at detecting threat, but really bad at knowing if its threat detection is appropriate. But how does the amygdala learn what a threat is? Through the signal sent to it from the hippocampus. The hippocampus essentially takes all of our experiences that get encoded into different parts of the brain, the olfactory center, the visual center, our like physical sensations, our emotions, the hippocampus gathers all this sensory information from different parts of the brain and pulls it together into what we think of as memory, coherent memory. And along with those memories are learnings. Again, learnings about the self, others, in the world, and how to stay safe and survive in the world. So the hippocampus and the amygdala are constantly talking and interacting underneath the hood. Am I safe or am I not? If I'm not safe, what do I need to do to stay safe and get my needs met? Let's take a little bit of a look at memory in the brain.
The question becomes then, where is the memory? And what we started to understand is that there isn't a nicely sort of packaged memory that's sort of folded up like a letter and sort of placed inside of an envelope in one specific area of the brain. Different parts of memories are coded in different locations of the brain. Think about your first kiss. The visual elements are coded at the back of the brain in the visual cortex. The smell components are coded in the olfactory cortex just above the nose. The motoric, the kinesthetic elements, they're coded up here in the motor cortex. The emotional elements are coded in deep brain structures like the amygdala. And together it's the hippocampus that is going to grab a hold of those individual brain anatomical areas, those balloons of information, and it's going to bind them together and produces a memory that you're capable of remembering.
So I hope we're learning from that just a little bit more about the role of the hippocampus and how even what we think of as memories, it's not that they're necessarily stored in the hippocampus. It's just the hippocampus is responsible for pulling all these different pieces of information together and organizing them. In the event of a traumatic experience, and a trauma we can just broadly generally think of as anything that overwhelms the nervous system's capacity to cope, right? That thrusts us into a state of survival. A traumatic experience gets really activated in the amygdala, and the hippocampus changes functions. It stops doing its job of organizing memories and filing sensations and together into coherent memories. It actually switches functions and moves into hormone production. It changes jobs. And so this is where, following a traumatic experience, sense fragments start to exist in the brain, and the traumatic memory is not coherent and often lacks language. It often lacks words, right? This is also where, theoretically speaking, we can think of fragmented parts coming from, right? Because the brain is just thrust into a survival state. Traumatic experience kind of messes everything up. It messes up communication across the different parts of the brain. And we might start getting these fragmented parts of self. Just another note here again on the difference between explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory has voice. It has language. We are consciously aware of facts, figures, details, definitions, autobiographical experiences, right? Implicit memory does not have language. Implicit memory is unconscious. I want us to pay particular attention to emotional implicit memory, because that is the information that's most necessary when we're engaging with parts work in clinical practice, that every part is operating from an implicit emotional learning, right? This is going to be a deeply held gut level feeling about the self, others, of the world. What does that sound like, Dan? Something like, I'm not lovable. I'm not safe. I must do this in order to XYZ. I can never let myself cry because if I do, I get punished or I get rejected. I must people please in order to maintain connection. I can never be my most authentic self. I can't ever trust other people. If I show other people who I really am, they'll see the real me and I'm disgusting, right? These are the kinds of implicit emotional learnings that trauma parts will sort of download and internalize. And that actually those kinds of messages are necessary for the system's survival. It's like what children do when they're raised in a traumagenic environment where their needs are not met. The first place a child's brain often goes is there's something wrong with me. And there has to be something wrong with me so that I can change to get my needs met. And this is some of the ways that these implicit emotional learnings start getting internalized by the brain. Again, these neuronal clusters that fire and wire together and learn how to stay safe and survive and get needs met depending on the social environment and the cues therein. Okay. So we're really, really paying attention to emotional implicit learnings. Other emotional implicit learnings, not to be all like, Danny Downer about it, are things like, I am safe. I am lovable. I can trust myself. I can trust other people. Wherever I go, their friends are, right? Just to balance it out. Okay. So again, why does any of this matter, Dan? Why are we spending so much time talking about the neurobiology of parts? Because parts exist as a result of neurobiological brain functions. We're working with implicit emotional learnings about safety and survival. The brain's job is to learn and process, and it does so through experience. It learns through experience. We are always working with the brain. Okay, let's take a brief look at memory reconsolidation. Long story short here, again, you'll have access to this slide. There's a difference between counteractive change and transformational change. We used to believe that once a memory was formed, just like we were watching a little bit in that video, that's it. There the memory is, it's solid and forever unchanging. Our recent neuroscience, especially in the 1990s, the brilliant decade of the brain, we started learning a lot more. Memory is malleable. And if we want to go a little bit hippy dippy trippy here, which I like to be hippy dippy trippy in my practice, my students know, my clients know. Whenever we remember, so I've heard it said, the best way to maintain a memory is to never remember it. Never remember it. Because anytime we remember something, we're actually only remembering the last time we remembered. This is where an eyewitness account in a jury trial is the least reliable account because we're going off of a one person's subjective memory about an objective sequence of events and experiences. Totally unreliable information. It's not how the brain works. Memory is malleable. Bruce Ecker and Laurel Hulley and their colleagues discovered this mechanism of change in the brain called memory reconsolidation, which gives us the opportunity to change implicit emotional learnings. This is a process of transformational change, differing from counteractive change, like our traditional kind of talk therapy or CBT-oriented methods. There's a lot of benefit to those ways of working, lots of benefit. They can be massively stabilizing for our people. But what they often fail to do is reach those parts of the brain carrying and holding these implicit emotional learnings and transforming them from the inside out and the outside in. I really urge, or maybe I should say there's a part of me that wants to take a very firm stance here with all of you to say, go learn about memory reconsolidation. It will change everything for you. You're going to be light years ahead of your colleagues, and people are going to be banging on your doors because you're going to be just letting clients go left and right because they've transformed so massively. It is an X-ray into the change process. Bruce Ecker's work with memory reconsolidation, go look it up and learn more. Let's take more of a look at how memories can change.
If Candel's work helped establish that memories can't form without new proteins that build new connections, what happens to those connections when you remember something. At the time, memory was pictured kind of like a library.
The underlying dogma was that when you formed a memory, it was filed away in your brain, and that's it. It was there now forever.
It's called consolidation.
You can't modify it. It just is. It's just in the brain.
So when you remember your first kiss, you pull out that book, look at it, and put it back. Though it may fade over time or get lost in the stacks, the original story or memory is always still there. Nader wondered, could this really be true? Or is it possible that just the act of recalling the memory could rewrite the story?
It turns out memory is not at all actually like putting a book away in the library of the brain, but it's more like bringing up a file on your computer and constantly modifying that file.
The theory is every time you recall something, you have to pull it up off the hard drive to view it. To return it to long-term memory, you have to hit save and reconsolidate the memory by creating new proteins to essentially rewire the memory into your brain.
Imagine something precious in a box, and then each time you take it out, it changes a little bit. And then you put it back. And then you take it out, it changes a little bit. That's how your memory works.
The idea that the simple act of remembering could make your memories vulnerable to change transformed our understanding of memory.
Now, I want you to know, in this process of memory reconsolidation, we're not erasing autobiographical memory, right? We're not, it's like what I tell my clients all the time. We can't ever change what happened, right? We can never change what happened. We might learn how to make peace with what happened because we can't ever change it. But what we can change is how you hold what happened, what you learned about yourself in the wake of what happened, right? Now, the way memory reconsolidation works, here's another analogy for you, and then I'll go more into this slide. It's like the different Word documents, right? We have the OG Word document starting from birth and these implicit memory systems that carry these emotional learnings about self, others, and the world. What counteractive therapies do is they start a new Word document. You say, open up the new Word document and write all these wonderful, beautiful things, and just remind yourself about all those wonderful, beautiful things. But then there lives the original Word document with the original learnings that goes into that zip file back there. And until that original Word document is changed, it's always going to override the new document, always, because it's part of like the master system, right? I'm not a big tech guy, so I'm kind of winging it here. What we're doing with memory reconsolidation is we're saying, thank you so much, wonderful new document with all the positive things under the sun. We're opening the original Word document and we're copying and pasting the new learnings into the original Word document, saving it, storing it, and letting that start to ride the system. So the way that we do that in practice, we activate the neural network where there's this deeply distressing emotional learning. We introduce opposing, contradictory, or mismatching information and experiences that the brain then has to make a decision about. Am I going to choose the old learning, or am I going to choose the competing, contradicting information that's right in front of me? Well, the brain is going to choose the new contradicting information that's right in front of me. How could it actually be true that I, at my core, am unlovable, and yet my aunt and uncle through all these years supported me and hugged on me and kissed me and gave me that free house I didn't have to pay rent for, right? What's true? The brain is going to come to what's true. So we introduce this competing, opposing, counter mismatch information that then gets into the neural network, and the neural network reconsolidates with the new learning. Okay. This is how and why parts work and other experiential therapies like EMDR is effective, like brain spotting, accelerated resolution therapy, right? Sensory motor psychotherapy. Why, AEDP, EFT, the alphabet soup of everything that we do. The reason why any of these models is effective in creating transformational change is through this natural brain mechanism of memory reconsolidation. We activate, we mismatch, we rewrite and reconsolidate. Okay, the bread and butter in my 14 minutes that I got left. This is the part of me that just like gets so excited about this stuff, neurobiology. I'm telling you, my goodness, don't get me talking about it. Working with parts. Again, just make sure that you're practicing within your scopes of training and competence. I just really want to plug that, okay? I want us to look at this little video and see if we can clock a few of this man's parts as we're seeing them in the video, okay? This is from a little documentary called 10-Meter Tower. It's like a 16-minute, you can find it on YouTube. But let's watch this little clip. I love this guy. Lots of parts here, lots of parts. Let's see if we can clock some of them.
All right, good. There you go.
I show almost every single one of my clients this video because they come in, Dan, I am desperate for this change. I want to get rid of this thing or get rid of that thing or do different and live 100% different. And then we start to engage in a process of change. And you know what happens? Their parts pull them back. Their nervous systems pull them back and say, absolutely not, because I know better. What kinds of parts did we see here? We saw anxious parts, we saw curious parts, we saw courageous parts, we saw thinking parts, we saw the heck no, absolutely not parts. Some other parts. What else do we see? Just briefly here.
Analytical. I think that analytical, like measuring up, trying to determine
Great.
what's the real kind of dimensions of this.
Right, the risk analysis parts, the fearful parts, the shit, geez, it's impossible, right? We could probably easily clock like no less than 50 parts that emerged here if we really, really wanted to take it frame by frame, right?
Mhm.
Generally speaking, broadly speaking, I show you this because the parts know best. The nervous system knows best. This is where our clients can engage with us, believing they are absolutely 100% motivated to do whatever it takes to make the changes they want to see. And then what happens? Their implicit emotional learnings take hold. They experience these autonomic responses in their nervous systems that pull them back from the ledge. I know better. I know that if I jump off the diving board, I'm going to land in the pool, and I know that I'm going to be just fine. But my body, those parts of me that know better, say, absolutely not. You're going to die. It means certain death and splat. The difference between I know better, but I feel. The I feel parts are always going to win, folks. The I feel parts are always going to win because they're driven by those survival-oriented implicit emotional learnings. Okay? How do we identify parts? It's really quite simple. We can identify them through words, right? I'm statements, typically of a negative nature. We can track in the body physical sensations. We might notice sudden shifts in affect, mood, relational behaviors or responses, right? We might see them suddenly become very giddy or start to kind of close down and shut down. And what do we want to do? Simply from a place of curious compassion. Curiosity is key, right? Scooby-Doo ear. Always wear that Scooby-Doo ear. Just be curious. I'm just getting more information, especially when parts emerge that are maybe a little bit more assertive or angry parts can be really hard to sit with, which is why we need to do our own work and really make sure that we're grounded in our nervous systems and our core selves, right? And be curious and just name, what are we seeing here? It looks to me like this. One of my favorite phrases to use with my people is the way I'm hearing you is, or the way that I'm perceiving you in this moment is. Trying to destigmatize, right? Because everything our clients do is often coming from that positive intention, survival-oriented place. And we can start to just map out patterns over time. Okay. Parts are basically organized. Again, I'm kind of flying here because I just got so excited, my excited parts. So I'm going to fly through some of this. But know that you will have access to this and you can always email me and I'd love to set up a meeting and talk more. That our parts are basically organized according to the implicit emotional core learnings, those core beliefs, and then the adaptive survival strategies, these internal laws for how to stay safe and survive, right? So we can think of the beliefs as these I'm statements, these conclusions that were drawn from experience about self, others, in the world, and then the strategies of fight, flee, freeze, appease, or attach. What is the strategy that wants to emerge in this particular context? And we can start to map it out over time. And just know that every survival strategy, and I even want to encourage you to start thinking of any symptoms as strategies. Okay? I'm very firm in taking a non-pathologizing approach for my people from a trauma-informed lens, that most of the things we call symptoms were really at one time necessary adaptive survival strategies. Okay? So you might even in your mind start to think, I'm thinking symptom, but really what is that? It's a strategy. And the strategy always makes sense in the bigger context. Always. This is called coherence. It always makes sense. IFS tends to organize parts along these lines. Exiles that are burdened by trauma and shame, firefighters that really emerge in more extreme ways through like self-harm, addiction, sexual compulsions, eating disorders. Managers are parts that just tend to be try to kind of regulate the system through these different strategies like critical parts or perfectionistic parts, people-pleasing parts, the parts that love to have control. And then at the center of it all is the self, the core self. Right? How do we unblend from parts? One of the biggest ways that we do this is starting to identify the part. What part is emerging here and now? Does that part have an image? Does it have a sound? Does it have a belief? Does it have a physical sensation? Locate it in the body. And we can ask the client to step back from that part, or can we ask that part to take a step back from us? Right? It's really very, even as simple as, oh my gosh, like the perfectionist came out, right? How far back does that perfectionist part go? How far back does that strategy go? Oh, for as long as I can remember. What might be the youngest age at which you started feeling like a perfectionist? 4 years old, right? Okay. Does a 4-year-old have a license to drive a car? Little bit of humor, laugh, 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 and that can unblend. Even just that little intervention set can help our clients unblend. Oh, it's not me in my core self, it's a survival-oriented part of me that took the steering wheel. So we want to identify the part, however it's manifesting, and then even start to engage in a little bit of a dialogue. What does the part need? How does the part feel? What is the part story? What does the part want? Right? And we don't ever, ever, ever want to force our clients anywhere that they're not ready to go. All of this assumes client consent. Okay. We can just broadly generally think of left brain as being the very logical, rational parts, like where the present day adult self lives, where we're able to access core self energy. And it's right emotional brain, this is very simplistic, where those wounded parts live, the trauma parts that carry those implicit emotional survival learnings. So we can even just holding this much, even just holding this much can transform practice. Is my client right now operating from left brain or right brain? Where are they at? Where am I at in myself? Am I operating from present day adult self, wise adult core self, or am I operating from a child part, a wounded part, an anxious part, a fearful part, an angry part, right? What's the impulse here? And so then how do we really work experientially? We want to get people out of their thinking brains and into their feeling brains, not the I know parts, but the I feel parts. We want to hold and keep our clients there. And really, one of the best ways that we can work experientially is through imaginal techniques. The imagination is brilliant for creating transformational change. And we can use the imagination to actually facilitate and create these mismatch experiences that introduce the neural networks to new competing information. This is how something like accelerated resolution therapy, one of our participants talked about that. What are we doing? We're imaginally revising the images in the brain, changing the images that the brain sees when we think about that particular event. And then what happens? Distress is gone. It's just gone, right? We can really harness the therapeutic relationship to engage in parts and to facilitate that transformational healing process because we ourselves are providing a new corrective emotional experience. Um, One type of protocol that's often used in parts work that I like to use myself is can you, from your present day adult self, see this younger you with loving eyes? Can you see that younger you with loving eyes? Can you shift into the younger part? What is it like for that part to be seen with loving eyes? Shift back into adult self. What does this younger you need? Can you give them that need? Can you meet that need? Can the younger you accept it and embrace it? And what is it like for them to do so? Can you pull that younger you out of the past into the present with you now? And can you tuck them away safely? This is just one type of intervention, one of my favorites and go-tos that I just wanted to introduce here. And then we help our clients, like in my last, gosh, minute and 10 seconds, in all the brilliant ways that you probably already know how. Help your clients take in the information, sit with it, repeat it, receive it, and consolidate it. Grounding, resourcing every step of the way. Again, following the stabilized process, integrate. My goodness, I am flying. Here we go. What are the biggest things that I want you to walk away from? Parts work was not created from the IFS Institute or Dick Schwartz. It goes back a long, long, long ways. What are parts themselves? They are implicit emotional learnings that carry survival impulses, right? They are a series of clusters of neural networks that learned how to stay safe and survive in the world in particular ways. And those emotional learnings can change through that memory reconsolidation process. We want to just be aware of our clients' parts, be aware of our own, and always maintain Scooby-Doo ear curiosity, right? There are tons and tons and tons of training opportunities out there. Go out there, play, explore, have fun learning. Again, you should have access to these resources. Any quick last minute questions while we're coming to close? I know this is a lot. I threw a lot at you. I know we are
If
at
you
the
have,
end
how
of
about this?
the
If
time.
you have a question, stick around and ask Dan the question. If you don't, just very fast. In the chat is your attendance sheet, and a quick survey because we're starting to brainstorm for next year. We would love to hear any thoughts on how we can do this transparently for all of you here. This was our most successful SMI series yet. I think it has to do with the fact that it was training and practice focused. So thank you all for attending. But um, if you have questions for Dan, I'm only going to let him stay for a couple of minutes because he has his own doctoral class tonight that he has to attend. So, does anyone have a question they want to ask Dan before I make him go to class?
What happens if a client doesn't feel like they can actually like access the part? Like if they're
kind of like in the experiential thing that we did, like if we couldn't touch that like piece of us, like what would you do in that case?
Mhm. First and foremost, honor the protection and name it, right? And help the client integrate that maybe that's where they're at right now. Some parts models and some parts system would say that's another part in itself. It's like a blocking belief or a blocking part. It's a manager or even a firefighter that's protecting the exile. Essentially, what the nervous system is saying is, I'm not ready to go there. I'm not ready for that type of change. And we really just titrate the change process, really slice it super thin. And we can explore with our people, what is the risk? What is the risk? What's the predictive fear if we were to touch on this thing or talk about that thing? But first and foremost, we honor the protection and we love on the protection. We love on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will let one more person. I know I'm being very intentional. I'm trying to protect Dan's parts. Is there one more question that Dan can take?
But when would you not use this? Is there anyone you wouldn't use this with?
Um, yes, just like any of our training, any of our models, we do really want to prioritize client needs, client goals, and the client's focus. And so if we start introducing this type of language and the client says absolutely not, we might flag that for ourselves as a protector part, but meet the client where they're at. Use their language, take their lead, right? So if a client comes back and is like, parts, absolutely not. I am my own singular, unitary self, and that's the end all be all. And we say, you know what? Yes, honey, you absolutely are. And we're going to work around those parts and protections for ourselves, mapping out their survival systems and survival strategies and just navigating accordingly, right? But I would say those might be the biggest places. Or remember too, it's like assessment carries on throughout the entire treatment process. We are never not assessing, never not assessing, right? So we always want to move at the client's pace, letting them really kind of be the driver, we're the passenger with a map, right? Ultimately, we might know where to go, but it's up to them to make the decision to turn left or right, push gas or push brake, right? So we always want to prioritize their lead. Great question. And
Thank
there's a lot more to, I mean, we could probably have an hour and a half long dialogue just.
Thank
Yeah, I'm not letting you do that to Dan. Okay, so everyone, if you were signed up for today, I will be emailing out the PowerPoint. I'm going to make it a PDF first because it was 50 slides. So you can expect that at the beginning of next week. Thank you all for coming. Dan, I'm going to text you. This was great.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night,
Such a
everyone.
pleasure, you all.
Thank
Take
you.
good
Thank you
Thanks so
care.
so much.
much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.